closer now.
How's that?
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah,
Does that work?
totally.
So the one on the left is Edward Munch. That's from the Spanish. It's called Self-Portrait with the Spanish Flu from 1919. Quite bright and colorful, and even the brushstrokes. I think there's like a kind of a rigor there. I feel like there's an energy there, as opposed to the Titian on the right, which is during the time of the Black Plague, 400 or 500 years earlier. And I was thinking this was such a striking difference between the two. Both Titian and Munch had, Munch had the Spanish flu and Titian had the bubonic plague. I mean, those are very different things too, but they're both pandemics that devastated communities and made death a very kind of real, tangible thing around in their lives. Munch recovered. He did a portrait while he had the Spanish flu, and Titian, this was the last painting he ever made. So he was doing this as he was dying, probably. And I believe that it's his son as well as himself who are on the other side of Jesus. And I just thought it was interesting to think about these works, because, and I'll just kind of go back to what I was saying earlier, in that they're reflective of how each of us each of us are alone. We're connected through Zoom and technology. They didn't really have that back then. They're more isolated, I think. But even still, we have people in long-term care homes. They're isolated, or, whenever you're in quarantine, you're isolated by yourself. You're essentially dealing with these things by yourself if you do get sick, or if a loved one gets sick, right? So in the end, I think it's it's illustrative of this fact that, ultimately we experience these pandemics, whether it's Spanish flu or bubonic plague or COVID-19, in a really personal, intimate way. We're really just generally confronted with the self. And I think that's what happens with these self-portraits, right? And I think that these artists are coming at it in very different ways. Titian, it's almost like I would be surprised if I think he knew he was dying. Maybe he knew his son was dying, and this is kind of like a prayer. And kind of a preparation for the afterlife of what's coming, maybe. I mean, it's impossible to say what was going through their heads at that time, but I feel like there's a certain cognizance there in this. It's like an offering, but in the sense that they're Titian in the corner taking Jesus's hand in the left, it's like he's offering comfort, but it's really, I think, the opposite. He's looking for comfort in his last days. Well, anyway, we could kind of read into paint. I could talk about paintings all the long day, and we don't have to. I won't make you guys do that. But I thought that these two were just so illustrative of the very many different ways that we all have to experience this pandemic in our own way. And I think ultimately any kind of art that comes out of this experience will also be really individualized and personal and intimate in the same way. What do you guys think?
Are those your birds, Mike?
The birds are amazing.
Can you hear the birds?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
That's
Is
great.
it okay?
It was like your thought going there.
I think if it happens now, it will less likely be. There'll be a few people, but it'll be less likely to be that literal. I think with subjects, if you could deal with a subject beyond its immediate theatrics.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can actually make things that imply, like Barnett Newman's Stations of the Cross. It's about Christ's walk up the whatever, I can't remember the whole term, but walking with the cross through the town, and rather than illustrate it, he made an equivalent of it, so that it wasn't a literal narrative, but it was an equivalent of the passion, or the sense of what was actually happening in that sort of completely emotional and kind of an internal drama rather than an outside illustrated drama.
Right.
I think some people will, if you take that Vietnamese pictures, that have worked their way into art, some of those horrible pictures. Some people did that, and then other people did, something that would be about something like Vietnam without being Vietnam. So it'll be interesting to see whether the artists in the next year or two, or whatever, how many years this goes, will how many will be literal, how many will maybe be responding in a less non-representational way, but looking for the same power and the same, like you say, Rick, the differences and how somebody might choose.
Yeah, if at all. Like, some people might just want to put this whole thing behind them and really focus on the future, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's always a possibility too.
There was an instance last night, and in my background, I've been really interested in the documentary mode of photography, but I've kind of strayed away from that, I guess, in the last few years, in terms of what I do in the studio, what I do in the dark room, and what ends up being shown to the public. But last night at 7 o'clock, and everybody knows at 7 o'clock, around the world, people show their gratitude for nurses and doctors and first responders, and I think it's a really lovely common communal gesture. But last night at 7 o'clock, Angus and Laura went out, and Charlie was at the front. Charlie Brown is my dog, and he was at the front door, and he was just laying there, and I was compelled to. And it was kind of weird, and Laura called me on it in after the fact, but I grabbed my phone and just started recording the dog listening to this noise outside, right? So it was this chance, of recording this moment, but also stepping outside of the moment. Laura came in and she said, "What are you doing? I mean, we're out there, we're making noise. It's like a matter of us showing our gratitude and appreciation, and you're squirreled away in here with your phone taking a video of the dog," right? But I said, right, no, I totally get that. I totally appreciate that. And I thought about it, and I was like, well, but I'm really compelled to record this moment too, and I have this desire to. It's reemerging to make documents of this time, because it is such a unique and strange moment that we find ourselves in. So,
do you think that directly relates to your practice in terms of like photography, like going out and trying to capture those moments, but trying to kind of set up those moments, guide them so that those chance opportunities arise that you can take advantage of? Or is that like a different kind of approach? This is has shifted your approach in a way.
I maybe, but I it's probably too early to say at this point. I've thought about the last number of projects that I've done, which are almost anti-photojournalistic, and a lot of them have sprung from or have grown out of an event that is reported upon by the news, or by the media, and I will go to these, various different places after the fact, or in a way that isn't, I'm not looking to do reportage per se, but have something that is, it approaches it from maybe a different side, but there is still, without question, I'm not really going in and directing the scene, other than the fact of me being there. And we all know that that of course changes any environment, especially when you pull out a camera. So I'm aware of, certainly aware and respectful of that, condition that's there. But I don't know. I'm really interested to see how things, how this goes over time. And I think we're in it for a while. So I do think though that maybe where we're at, art, when we're making, and I'm speaking only for myself here, but I'm starting to believe that the act of making art in these times is inherently political, and is a matter of us, raising our hand and saying, like this, I have something to say, and I want to say it at this moment. So maybe it's always been that way, but right now it seems particularly poignant.
That certainly seems like the time we live in, but I think that art can also be very therapeutic, cathartic, even for people who are just kind of stuck at home and they just want to do something and they want to feel productive and they just want to feel, they just want to keep their hands busy. And it's not, I don't know if it's political for them in that sense, but who knows, maybe it is what comes out of it. Just the act of making being inherently political in that sense in this time of that we're living in.
I don't know, I think personally it's a little bit difficult to make right now.
For you, for sure.
Oh man, it's like
I feel pretty lucky.
Stuck in a madhouse, and the idea of making things, it just skips across the surface, and there's nothing to grab onto. And I think that what's interesting about the document, whether it be the paintings that you brought up at the beginning, Rick, or Mike, with the idea of like just recording time as it's happening, they require, I think, a certain level of action that and trust in yourself, that and dedication. And I don't know about the therapeutic aspect of this. I would kind of push against that. That I think that it's more of an action than it is a therapy, I would say. But I'm coming at it from a different perspective, perhaps a little bit different set of circumstances.
Yeah, I think for me it's both, right? Because I am fortunate enough to be able to have a studio to go to and make work. And speaking a little bit from experience, is that in and of itself is therapy, that I can actually, leave the house, not kind of interact with anybody, keep my distance. I have a place that I can go away from the home. It's really nice. And still engage in that creative act and feel productive in that way, in a way like on my own terms. But of course, what I'm making, the content is driven by all kinds of things, and certainly informed by everything that's going on around us and how people are dealing with it or not dealing with it very well, So yeah, it's not one or the other, but it can be both.
I think that I definitely understand where you're coming from in terms of the therapeutic aspect of it. I mean, I find when I zone out on my art, I have all of this stuff going on in the background of my head. right? And I'm processing these things without actually acknowledging that I'm processing all of this stuff that's going on, because I just get in the zone. But I do understand where Cedric's coming from, where, you know, right now it just feels like it's so daunting to even try and take on certain aspects of our work. But I mean, I'm at a point right now where I'm ready to start weaving, and I know that I'm going to start weaving, and I'm just going to zone out, and I'll have just gone through all of this stuff that's going on without even knowing that I'm actually processing it, right? And I think that that will be helpful for me to get through that.
Angus.
Hi,
So
Angus.
do you have all your materials that you can weave for a while, or are you worried about that, running out of stuff?
Well, I actually just finally got to a point in a couple of projects where I'm actually ready to start weaving. I just need to do a couple more surface procedures on some of them, and I'm ready to get going. And it's kind of like, this kind of come at an opportune time for me, where I am actually ready to get hands-on and like be intimate with my work in that sense. So I think that, yeah, I will have a lot of weaving that I can get caught up on. I have about 16 weavings to get going on, and they're dental floss, so it should take some time.
Well, I've got a dying mouse and a very worried looking mouse on my studio wall that has been lying in state for 2 or 3 years or so, waiting for someone to yell action. Perhaps this event will somehow raise that. It's kind of interesting, because what I was trying to deal with it, I wasn't absolutely sure. This kind of somewhat decayed mouse it was going to be an animation where, you know, a gallery animation where it just simply took its last breath. And now, for some reason, now it seems to have taken on some other kind of importance or relevance or something, just where it's time to get it going. You know, it's literally been lying in state.
Right. Rats are in crisis right now, right? Because rats are in crisis.
Yeah.
Because when people are out and about and doing their thing, we create a lot of waste. We create a lot of garbage and detritus that the rats, scavengers, that's what they live off of. And now that we're not out and about as much, I've heard stories that they're resorting to cannibalism. They're moving more into residential areas, wherever the people are, wherever the food is, that's where they're going to be going, right? So that is a story of our time, I think. Yeah.
If he doesn't expire before anything happens, he's only got one breath left.
I mean, rats is metaphorical too, so class disparity and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's huge right now. The class that's a side story that is enormous in America in particular. The class thing, when you look at places like Louisiana, beside Florida, which both had surges, but the death toll in Louisiana, which is like a fraction of the population of Florida, is huge, and much more than Florida's. Yeah, there's stuff out there for somebody to deal with, for sure.
Is that where artists come in?
Yeah, well, it may be.
I don't know.
At the end of last week, we said, well, are we supposed to do it? And then, remember I mentioned, if not us, then who? You know, and you, Mike, alluded to that a bit too. I mean, just, you know, are we going to have to talk about this? I mean, can we ignore it? Does it have to be literal? Can it be symbolic? But it's going to be hard not to have it manifest itself somewhere.
This morning I was out. I went out for an early morning run, and I was coming back through downtown on my way back home at about 7 o'clock this morning. I guess it was around 7 o'clock, and there were construction sites that were just opening up, and the numbers of construction workers of, you know, mostly that I saw anyways, mostly men, but of all ages, from like 18 to, you know, in their 60s, late 60s, were lining up to get into the job site, right? And I think that one of the things that I mean, it needs to be acknowledged, and I know that we're all very, very aware of this, but that there is a certain amount of privilege that allows us to be in our homes and to have time to be spending this time with our families or our loved ones. You know, it was just a good sort of good fortune on my part. I have 8 years ago that you know, my life kind of, or my working life, took a detour, and I ended up working at the college and not as a tradesperson. So, you know, this pandemic would look completely different to me right now if I hadn't taken taken a left instead of a right at that particular juncture. So, you know, there is a privilege, and I think that there is with that a responsibility too of acknowledging. But then what do we do with our time? And I understand very, very well said what you're saying about how, you know, like, I mean, life obligations and the overwhelmingness of this whole thing makes it difficult. But you know, I do think that there is you know, it's a responsibility there too, that, you know, we hopefully can do something. I don't know. I don't know what that looks like at this point, right? We're a month in Victoria here. We're a month into self-isolation. So, you know, we'll see. But I do think that those was just something that I wanted to acknowledge at the beginning of this.
Do you feel compelled to record those kinds of things in the same way that you were recording Charlie Brown, listening to the sounds, honoring the healthcare workers on the front lines? Is there a bit of
Not yet, but I don't know, right? Like, if this goes on for a year or 18 months, I have no idea. We all really have no idea what that would look like, right? So possibly, I don't know.
I think what's kind of interesting is the act that we're all doing individually, and then on these kind of meetings that we have virtually, or of projecting ourselves into the future and trying to figure out. It's a bit of a hopeless task, trying to figure out what's coming next, and, you know, worrying for you know, your friends and your kids and everybody around you, but at the same time trying to be proactive and make things. It's an interesting move. It's an interesting thing to be in, and to try and acknowledge it and figure out a way to put yourself into it actively. You know, I don't know. Nobody knows, of course, where this is going to go. But at the same time, if you sit around waiting for it to go somewhere, you're not going to do anything. And so I think that, you know, what Rick's talking about, getting to the studio and painting, or wherever your studio is, for me, it takes a tremendous amount of effort and will. It's like time has become mushy, like it's porridge or something, and you're stuck in it and can't quite
It is weird.
That's the perfect description.
Yeah.
Totally perfect.
Porridge.
You get up in the morning and you're in the porridge, and then you go to sleep at night and you're like, how can I sleep in porridge? I work in my home office next to my bed. There's no separation between personal work. Now this is like broadcast across whatever, the internet, whatever that is. and the as Rick, you were saying, this kind of you become insular. You're like isolated to your own little unit, but at the same time, it expands out in ways that you can't even comprehend. Because every time you feel something, you're like, I sneezed in the morning. I'm like, uh-oh.
Right.
But I live right outside my window is a massive hedge that's just coming into flower.
Well, it's the season, right? Too.
Yeah, and you can't help but put yourself into this weird, soupy, physical, like liquid time, where it seems like nothing happens, and yet days pass. And how do you capture that? I personally am wondering if it is possible to do so in a visual medium, that perhaps maybe a written word in some way is the way to capture this durational experience that we're having, that everybody's having. I don't know. What do you, I mean, Rick, you've been painting a lot.
I've been painting a lot. I had a what do you call it? A porridge night.
Yeah.
I
Every night is a porridge night around here.
I had at least 3 distinct REM cycles. I felt like I had 3 nights sleep in one night. So
yeah.
I was like, I woke up, I like had a bird chirping outside my window, but it was pitch
like
black.
4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah,
Pitch black. Yeah, those little bastards.
It's like, you know, you just all the time. It's just like so.
We're driving them away.
it's just stretched out and turned inside out like putty.
Yeah.
Because I can relate to that, but that kind of happens to me when I'm painting too. Time does weird things, you know. I can just get really into something, and then next thing I know, it's like 5 or 6 hours later.
But this is different because it's a time that's imposed on us from external circumstances. I agree. When you're working, you can lose yourself in your projects, and that's the ultimate state, I think, for an artist. That's maybe the reason why most of us do things.
Yeah.
But in a situation like this, you have an isolation and a thickening and the kind of coagulation of time and space beyond your control, and it's very difficult to conceptualize it, to make sense of it, and to act within it. For me, anyways, maybe it's the roles that I'm tasked with at the moment.
You're wearing a lot of hats.
Right at the moment, Mike's the only one with a hat, but yeah, you're right. And that's fine, right? That's just what it is, and that's okay. But I think that the compression of space and time into this kind of thing that is hard to define makes it difficult to then partition bits out and to take the time to care for yourself, for your family, for your practice, for anything. It's just like this weird time.
We often put parameters on our own activities, regardless, though, right? Like as a creative, you know, if you can make anything, what do you make? Where do you begin? So you start to give yourself parameters. You know, could be a conceptual framework, could be a discipline, could be whatever. So I think maybe the difference is that these parameters, all of a sudden we have to work within parameters that we don't necessarily set for ourselves, but are set for us.
That's a crisis for creative people, I think.
Pardon?
That's a crisis for creative people, I think. Like a massive one.
I'm really curious to see how it affects our students in the fall, right? Yeah, like whatever happens with that.
Yeah. We both of us, I mean, all of us worked at institutions here in Victoria, and tomorrow would have been our opening for our BFA show.
That's right.
Mike, when was Camosun supposed to open? Was it yesterday?
I don't think you got that. Did you get that question, Mike? He froze up on us there.
He's going
He's going on the chat.
Oh,
whoa. Uh-oh,
There he
there
is.
Sorry about that. I just got booted, but I'm back. What was your question, Sid?
When was the Camosun opening supposed to be? Was it last night or tonight for the BFA show or their grad show?
I think it was going to be the last that the students told me is that it was going to be tomorrow night. So
Okay.
it was something that I was, I was thinking, I have been thinking about for a good portion of the day, right? Is like, I'm at home doing paperwork and, coming up with demos and doing inventories and stuff like that. And it's the least that, my least favorite part of the job by a long stretch, especially at this time of year, right? Like, I mean, we should be prepping for year-end exhibitions and dealing with the anxieties and excitements that our students have at this time. And it seems just really foreign. Like, I mean, this is, my 8th year at Camosun, and before that was 3 or 4 years up at UVic at this time. So it's like, it's kind of ingrained in my, in my spring are these annual events. So it is really weird to be in that, for us to be in that state of limbo. I can only imagine, I can't even imagine, I truly can't imagine what it feels like for, a student that had these, these hopes and desires and ideas of what that event or events similar to that would be like. And they're just like, it was just all of a sudden they evaporated, right? Like, it wasn't even like there was a chance to, for any sort of resolve. They're just like, it just became steam.
Yeah.
Right. So
I've in the last week reached out to a few of the students that I've developed like pretty close relationships with over the past few years. And I know a lot of them are feeling like it didn't even really end. It just all of a sudden petered out, and then they were just kind of gone. And so there wasn't even like closure, which I think, Mike, is what you were saying right then, is like their mindset is like they're still at school, but they're not getting any feedback. They're not feeling like they really got to go with that bang that they were hoping to, like they've worked all year, like with Rick in your BFA 401 class, like they've been working their butt off for an entire year. And then, those students have also been working their butts off for years in hopes to be in this BFA 401 class, because each year they get to go to them and see them, and for them to just slowly pack their things up, and maybe they go home, maybe they go to an apartment, maybe they go to a storage unit with their stuff if they were, lucky enough to be able to get in and have resources to remove some of their art making supplies. Like,
yeah,
a lot of them rely so heavily on our facilities in order to be making and to have that sense of community. And so that just was absolutely just taken away from them. Not that it's anyone's fault that it was, but
I totally understand. And I think that that's part of what exacerbates the problem, is that may continue into the fall. If a lot of them are going to grad school, are they going to be starting the fall term in the grad school? Are they going to be able to move across the country to go to grad school? Are they going to be able to like get a truck to be able to do that? Like, are they going to be able to get jobs when they get there? So I think that not only is there not any closure for this year and for all the work they've been doing over the last 4 years, but their futures are kind of up in the air also. There's I can see how that would be really disconcerting, like where do you go from here? What do you do?
Well, and I was speaking to one of the students, and he was expressing concern. He's thinking, what does the landscape look like for an emerging artist? What are these funding opportunities that were once available? Where are the possible new funding opportunities going to arise from? Because everyone's taken such a huge financial hit. And yeah, like what you're saying, I mean, can you get a truck? Can you move? How do you find an apartment? I mean, a lot of people do virtual viewings when they are moving to another city or province or country, but everything is just so much harder given the landscape we're in.
Yeah, and I think part of the strangeness of the whole experience has been, and this probably is reflected in those paintings that you showed, Rick, in a way is a kind of, it's like a stolen time, and an invisible culprit. I don't know what the right word would be.
There's no one blame.
Good enough, I think.
It's like something happens, you can't see it. It's always looming like behind your head. As you're saying, Hollis, you're 3 weeks away from finishing your school. You're a month away from your BFA exhibition that you worked 4 years to get to. You can't, all of a sudden, you can't afford your apartment. Your summer job that you had lined up evaporates. Exhibition spaces have closed. And yet you can't see it, right? You can't see the thing that is doing this. And it's like this thing that lives up over here somewhere, in a corner of the room or outside in your neighbor's room, that is threatening everything that you've done. And you can't see it. You can't even, you can't wrap your head around it. And I think that that's part of the whole, that's what makes this so difficult.
What do you guys think about this as like a kind of massive reset where, because we're in this moment where it's complete limbo, where it's almost like we're kind of like back to square one, that people can create something out of that, whatever they wanted, whatever they needed to make out within this void, to, I don't know, as some kind of way to move forward into the future, like building it for themselves in that way as a creative.
But you have to.
Are you talking from the student perspective? Or are you talking about just in a general perspective?
Man, you guys feel like that? It's like a kind of like a reset in a way?
I think it would be a big, and when Cedric was talking about this might go into the fall, it might have been Cedric or somebody mentioned that. And, I saw this film on Shakespeare recently, and he goes back home after the Globe Theatre burnt down in London, and he's living at home, kind of hiding away. And this big, landed gentry guy, somebody that's very important in the hierarchy of the privileged people of Britain, comes to visit him. He's like a patron. He says, "You never traveled. How did you do all this stuff? How did you write about Danish kings? And how did you write about Romans, Julius Caesar? How did you write about these things?" And, if this does continue into the fall, maybe the emphasis now, I'm trying to think of what I'd do if I was still teaching. Maybe it goes inside people's heads more than it has been. Maybe the external stuff is going to be less available or less possible to draw on, and maybe you're going to have to go into your head, and maybe the outcome could be a little more authenticity from the individual, rather than being, learning how to sing with the choir, the contemporary canon and the choir of the canon or something, that you actually have to go into your own head and find something. And the same with materials. It might be a pencil and a piece of paper now. You can't go to the lumber yard. You can't go, to some of these other places. So, I think in the past, people have been challenged by the limited resources and difficulties in how to actually even acquire the objects and the material you might need to use.
Ralph, I think you raise a really, really good point. Charlie Brown, my dog, agrees. You know, I would almost put it this way, and it's definitely open for debate. But I think it's maybe we're entering a really interesting time to make art, but a really horrible time to try to learn about or to try to teach art in an institutionalized setting. You know, just given these distances that we have to respect now, and studio practice is so much about being in the studio together and learning from your instructors and learning from your professors and your technicians and people that are around you, but also so much of that is about learning from each other, right? And those late night conversations that they have around in the dark room or around an easel or in their studios, right? So you know, like that can't exist as it's kind of outlined right now. Like I imagine we'll eventually get back to that, hopefully, you know, sooner than later. But you know, there is definitely some real barriers in the way of that happening in the short term or the midterm. But it could be a good, you know, a really fruitful time for people to make work, as you say, with, you know, sometimes the simplest of materials, right? Like, by no means am I saying, you know, drawing is simple. But just the, you know, the pencil and the piece of paper, maybe that becomes, you know, a really poignant and you know, prescient way of making a statement. I don't know.
It could be after all this is said and done, we just see all this art coming out of the woodwork, like Hollis coming out with 2 years of weavings. All of a sudden, like an explosion of
done in a week.
That's just quiet
work.
That'd be really fascinating. Just
that would be great.
Yeah, like hibernating, kind of just getting close and making work, and then
it won't be coming out of our house. Lots of Lego.
Oh, you're presuming there's nothing there to bring out.
Oh, there's lots to bring out.
No, but maybe
you can't use power tools in your living room.
What's that, Rick?
You can't use power tools in your living room?
I have been.
You have been? Okay.
Yeah, we've been building
things.
Things.
Louder than power tools.
Oh yeah, Freya is a lot
and no one would
louder than a power tool.
I was thinking of subject matter, though. What subject matter could come out of the situation that you have right now? Like what, if that's what it is, what can come out of that? You don't know.
Sometimes
he's not buying it.
I know he's not buying it.
Sometimes
can you use your children as power tools?
Sometimes you're so close to your subject and to life that you can't take the time to reflect and stop and record the dog.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't, because they keep coming and getting you. That's part of it, right? It's kind of a and I know that we're really privileged to have the jobs and the lives that we have, especially here in Victoria. I mean, Mike, I'm just blown away by the birds behind you. It's awesome. Yeah. If anyone here is like listening to this from Winnipeg, sorry.
Yeah.
But not really.
Or Lethbridge.
Yeah. The thing is, though, that it gets, like, as I was saying, it gets really, everything just kind of thickens and coagulates, and there's no room for the separation. And maybe, Mike, I'm speaking to you more than everybody else, because we both come out of a photographic background. The camera will distance you from your subject. It does, right? It puts this thing in between you and your subject, and that piece of mediation, it does that distancing. It does it just by it being there. but at this point, that's not even, that can't come out. Like even that mediating device can't come out. It's too thick, too close, and too like too intimate. Being around kids, they're trying to figure it out. Our kids are really great at social distancing. When someone comes down the hallway and they see them, they panic and run back into the house. And then they're like, we're doing social distancing. And Freya goes and washes her hands for 30 seconds. They're amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. But their entire world is switched in a week or in a month. And to watch them try and figure that out. I mean, that's the thing that I get. That's where I go rather than making things. I'm just watching things and trying to continue to exist.
That's part of the process, I think, just being present and observing.
Yeah. But not recording in some ways. Like the idea of recording, it's too present. You can't get that remove. There's no space for remove. And that's why I think maybe writing is where it has to happen, because the duration of writing something down forces you to take that space, but also the time that I can't find anywhere else. So I've taken to writing at night in the kitchen on our cutting board, because one of us is sleeping in the living room, one is in one room and one is in another room, and there's nowhere else to go. Dude. So I write on a cutting board in my kitchen after everyone's gone to sleep. You're
doing it. I mean, you just, it's interesting because you said you couldn't do it, and now you're telling us that you're doing it. That's
I'm doing something thing. But it's not, I don't know if it's art.
Well,
it's too close right now. It's too close. But yes, I'm trying to do something.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point though, because you know, the painting we looked at of Munch, there he is being ravaged by a horrible disease, and he's painting himself. And he could call it porridge. He could call it other stuff. How can I have a fever, I'm sick. How can I make art? And it's not a bad example of that, somebody actually squeezing something out of a horrible situation where half the people in his neighborhood might be dead already or something. And
yeah, thanks God we're not there yet.
No.
You know.
So, Ced, I know that both of us have a similar background in a sense, in that we both spent a bit of time in Eastern Europe, in particular in Prague. And, you know, I was there working on a project of mine for 3 months. And I know that you studied in Prague as well. And I know that we know a lot of or about a lot of the same photographers that made work and in different ways during you know, the 60s and into the 70s. I'm thinking of the two Josephs, Joseph Sudek and Josef Kodelka, right?
Yep.
And two completely different bodies of work, but Josef Kodelka left, he fled, right? And he spent you know, the better part of 10 years, I believe, in exile. And this project that I'm referring to is called Exile, or The Exiles. And he was everywhere but home, right? And photographed very much, as you're saying, you know, the camera was this way of distancing himself from the world that he was seeing and longing to be back where he was from, right? But then you also have Josef Sudek, who spent the better part of 10 years in his studio, in his house, photographing through a window onto his garden, right? So two completely different ways of dealing with that notion of isolation, but using the medium of photography to get to you know, a way of speaking about that, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing else to say about that, maybe.
Prague's also where the Hunger Wall was built, right? And I can't remember what it was in. My memory is drawing a blank here, but what it was like one of the first examples of a like a make work kind of project to employ the populace after geez, I can't even remember what it was, but it's one of the first kind of social make work projects. I'm gonna look it up on my machine right now, but yeah. You're right. I miss Prague.
Yeah,
Were
us
you
too.
in Eastern Europe, like what, last summer?
What's that?
Wasn't Hollis in Eastern Europe last summer? Romania? Was it Romania?
Croatia.
Croatia.
Yeah. Went to the Venice Biennale and then took the boat over to Pula, and then drove down the Croatian coast down to Dubrovnik.
I wonder how much of work in the Biennale, the next Biennale, will be, you know, about this pandemic.
Yeah, I imagine it probably will have quite a bit of content relating to that, because how could it not be at this point, you know?
The Croatians would certainly have something to add to this discussion when those I forget which city was under siege, where the snipers were on the hill. They couldn't even go out for bread or anything, and they could literally be shot while they were shopping, and that went on for months and months and months. And they would certainly have something to share with us about how you live during a time like that. You know, if that to them, that might seem as big as this in an equivalent kind of way. It wouldn't be quite as big because it wasn't global, but the fact that you couldn't move without the danger of dying. And did anybody make art there during that time? And is there stuff that came out of there? Photography, I'm sure there is, and poetry, painting, writing. It'd be interesting whether they could help us through some of this. And
yeah, and I think that's my ideally was the reasoning behind me bringing that point up, and those two examples up, is that that time and those places were absolutely rich for cultural people making cultural contributions to society, and a lot of it had to happen underground and out of sight, and finding various ways of trading books around and texts and writing. I mean, writing flourished under the harshest of conditions socially, right? So maybe there is a hopeful lining to this to this in that sense, and maybe it comes out and over time. I'm not too sure.
I guess we have to decide whether we're fair weather artists or whether we're,
I thought about that, like for me, I'm hesitant to represent the ugly, the horror, that kind of thing. I'd rather be a force, a positive force in the world, and focus on that more optimistic kind of view, the more utopian, I suppose, than the dystopian. I'm not saying that there's not a place for that, but I think that is like a very real thing that we're going to have to, are we going to be making work about, the death toll or the mismanagement that's led to higher death tolls, or all the fallout that happens to those kinds of things? Or are we going to be focusing on the opportunities for, like the reset, creating something new for ourselves in that vacuum.
I think
That's
the
right.
danger to the reset idea, I agree. It's a bit of an opportunity right now to reset, but the danger of a reset in that case is the leaving behind of those who can't keep up. And I know there's been a lot of talk about that in relation to like climate issues at this moment, and how maybe we're not doing so great, but the world is benefiting from this. Mm-hmm. Certainly in Victoria, it's like that, but that's not going to be the same case around the world. And the danger in that idea is the leaving behind of the people who can't be in that privileged position that Mike was talking about earlier, where we have a place to live and a relatively stable social situation at the moment, and who knows what's going to happen, but there's a lot of people who don't, and even in our own communities who are like, all of a sudden there's a homeless population and there's nobody around, and the danger of a reset or a restructuring of things is that those people get left behind. Those like
more so.
Yeah, even more so.
Because they were. So.
Yeah. But I want to be the optimist like Rick as well. And that I think it is a chance for things to rejig and to shift, like fundamentally shift away from the things that, are tired and don't mean that much, to things that are new and do mean more. And I think that art can do that without explicitly saying this is what I'm doing. It just makes things that are unusual, uncertain, vulnerable, and opening up to ways of being in the world that otherwise wouldn't be considered. And in that way, I think we're totally in a position where things could happen. That's my utopian bit for the day.
But there's
pretty convincing.
You can do it.
It's also,
I'm done.
Yeah, there's the beauty factor too. There's beauty in truth, and if Goya's Horrors of War, and you got all these historical precedents of the Raft of the Medusa. You got all these. I remember a friend when I was showing a Jeff Wall's picture of dead troops and saying it was like the Raft of Medusa, and she looked at it and said, "Well, what's aesthetic about that? I don't see anything aesthetic. There's no aesthetic because it was blood and half skulls missing, and we had got this big discussion about truth and other things that also provide a value and a thing, and that there's beauty in truth, even if the appearance, the surface appearance, isn't beautiful in that aesthetic sense. There's other kinds of beauty, and it goes back to Keats, truth is beauty and beauty is truth, and those kind of quotes and stuff. But I think it's important to have both. I think if it all went to a way that the darkness was dwelled upon by every single artist on the planet, we'd probably all wilt and die. But if it's balanced as well by just a richness of visual work that just lifts you. They're almost two different jobs. If there was a job description for them, they would be two different jobs, but both very valid.
What is the job description of an artist now? I'm going to leave that one.
Yeah.
I'd answer it, but I'm drinking. I don't want to choke on my wine.
That's gone way too deep for this thing, isn't it? This platform is not intended for that question.
Actually, I wouldn't mind asking a question of everybody, because we are spending so much time in our homes looking, at the same walls and the same books and the same people. But in terms of those times where we do get out, how fantastic do they feel, right?
Yeah.
Like going out for a jog or going out to walk the dog, or maybe not going out to get groceries, because that's a pretty harrowing experience right now, I know, for everybody. But how even like 2 months ago, could we imagine enjoying walking around the block as much as we do now, right?
I thought you were going to start talking about the 4 walls that we're inside right now, and what it is we've got on them.
He doesn't have a wall. His walls aren't there.
He went outside because Charlie
I'm
Brown's
outside.
inside.
Yeah.
He could
Angus.
get some closure.
Yeah.
No, I was wondering where you're going with that. Like, what art are you looking at?
We could talk about that too.
Art?
Talk about
I don't know if I can even look at it anymore.
The art on your walls?
I'm kidding. I love the art on my wall. In fact, I have a piece right back here that is a painting, strangely enough, that I love. I showed it to you guys a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
I can bring it to the screen if you want again.
I've never been in your bedroom.
As a demonstration, if you'd like. Yeah.
Okay.
Are we supposed to introduce ourselves now?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, probably. My name is Mike Andrew McLean. I am a dad, a husband, a dog owner, a media technologist at our local community college, and a visual artist.
Okay, I'm Hollis Roberts. I'm the facility and production manager of the visual arts department, or the visual arts building at the University of Victoria. I have 2 cats, no dogs, and these are some of my friends.
I'm Ralph Stanbridge, and I taught art in post-secondary for 40 years, and I'm retired now, and I'm looking towards being more involved in drawing and animation, and like everybody else on this group, wondering what the next year or 2 will hold for what we're doing.
I'm Cedric Bomford. I'm an artist and also happen to be the chair of the Department of Visual Arts at the University of Victoria at the moment.
My name is Rick Leong. I'm an artist, predominantly a painter, and art educator at the University of Victoria. And
totally nailed it.
Ralph's protege and Cedric's and Hollis's colleague, and Mike's buddy.
That's the part of gathering in virtual forums like this that is a real shame.
Which part?
Oh, nachos.
No nachos. Yeah.
Come on,
dude.
What's that, Hollis?
We're missing the watering hole.
Why is it called a watering hole?
Yeah.
Beer hole?
That sounds awful. Does it?
Sounds gross. It's like you wake up in the morning and you're still stuck in the beer hole. That's not good.
That was my 20s.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. What are you drinking?
Cardboard.
Cardboard. Uh-oh. I think we might have just seen beer come out of Rick's nose.
Box wine is the best wine.
It's surely not the first time you've heard that, Rick.
Oh, that's ancient. That's as old as some of these paintings we were looking at.
I've never heard that.
Great reaction.
Myself, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man.